Hello again. Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at forecasting. We're going to take a look at types and ranges of forecasting models, accuracy. We're going to take a look at our mean absolute deviation, mean squared error, mean forecast error, and the mean absolute percentage of errors. All of these are looking at different types of accuracy and how well the type of forecasting you're using or doing. And then we're going to actually do some computing of forecasts. So a lot of work to be done in this chapter. So what are forecasts? Forecasts are nothing more than an inference about what might happen in the future. It's sort of like a crystal ball. We want to see what's going to happen, and it's never really 100% clear. We're not positive about what's going on, but we can use these forecasts, these good guesstimations, to figure out what we need for our company, such as how much raw material, how much labor is needed during that time, what machines will be used. So we're coordinating all these different parts of our company together to be able to have a good forecast or using a good forecast, and making sure that our company is running smoothly. So what types of forecasts are out there? The first is a technological forecast. This takes a look at technological progress, not considered specifically for operations, but because there's so much technology used today in our operations with the different machinery, even computer programs in service industry, we're taking a look at touch screens on computers, handheld devices. All of these are coming together on how we produce, how we serve. So we want to know we want to have a good technological forecast to make sure we're able to work together and make sure that we have the technology that we need to remain competitive. The next type is an economic forecast. Looking at an economic forecast, we're taking a look at future business conditions. We want to know employment levels, tax revenues, the needs of our economy. We're looking at long-term and intermediate term ranges here for our business growth. So what's happening out there? Due to economic changes, the need for our product can change, or the need for our service can change. So we need to take a look at those types of things within the economic forecast to understand and forecast better for our production. So the last type of forecast we're going to take a look at is a demand forecast. And that's really what we're going to focus in on for this class. And this gives the expected level of demand for a company's goods and services. When we take a look at a demand forecast, we want to know how much people will buy or how much our service will be needed for every single one of our products and services so that we know what we should produce. We know how much raw material to bring in. We know how much money we need and when we need it, when we're going to have payments coming in and when we're going to have to pay out for our raw materials. It's used in planning and control decisions throughout the company. So a good demand forecast can help us control our company even better. What influences this demand forecast? Well, the business cycle or the general business conditions that are out there. Where are we? Where's our product at for a specific product? Is it in a growth cycle? Is it a matured product? Is it slowly dying out? Is it a brand new product and it's just beginning? It's the birth of the product. What competitive factors? What are our competitors' products like? What are they looking at? How can we take a look at what we're doing to what they're doing, quality differences based on what people will want? When you take a look at this and you take a look at that value ratio, I like T-shirts. I like to wear casual clothing, especially in the summer. And I like sometimes even in the winter, I like a T-shirt underneath a sweater or something so it doesn't itch me up. So I know that if I go and I buy a T-shirt at, say, Walmart, that T-shirt is going to last me a season, a year, 2 years. But if I buy and it's going to be relatively inexpensive. But if I buy a T-shirt at, say, Macy's or Nordstrom's or Belk's, I expect that T-shirt to be a higher quality and last longer. So I'm looking at those type of things. What are people buying? When I have more money, I prefer to buy a better quality T-shirt. It's going to last me longer. It's going to wash up better. It's not going to pill. It's not going to literally become see-through in spots quickly. So I want those better T-shirts, but I know that I don't always have the discretionary funds to buy those T-shirts. So I take a look and say, okay, here's where my economic levels are now, and here's where things are in the economy. What am I expecting? Am I expecting a downturn? So I know what I'm going to buy. This is what your customers are taking a look at. So you need to know and understand all of this and how it relates to your demand. Trends. What's trendy? What do they want? What do people not want at that time? Your customer needs and wants. We're going back to that constantly. The company's marketing efforts. Do you have a bigger marketing effort on some products versus others? And there's a variety of other factors, and I've put up a chart here for you to take a look at to see how everything can come in together. Things like time of the year. Is it something that is time specific? Ranges of forecast. Looking at our ranges of forecast, we start off, even with demand forecasting, of long term. This is generally 5 years or more. And we're really getting into business planning here. We want to do products researching, capital planning. We want to take a look at where do we plan on being. We want to take a look at plant location. Do we need to build a plant? You can't just build a building and start working all in a day. It takes time. It takes planning to do this. Here on the main campus of ETSU, the parking garage took a long time. Trying to figure out where we were going to put the football stadium took a long time. This is long-term planning. It's often qualitative. We're not getting down to the nitty-gritty numbers in this. We're getting down to general ideas. It's a very broad plan. And we'll get, as time gets shorter, we'll get into more details during those times. Uses or methods such as this would take a look at technological forecasting and technological things that are out there. We look at the economic forecasting. We look at the demographics. Are the demographics changing? We do market studies, and we actually look at judgment, and we'll talk about that more about that later. The second type of forecast and range of forecast is intermediate ranges. Generally, 1 season to 2 years. This is more for aggregate planning. We're taking a look at our cash budgets. We're looking at sales planning and production planning. We want to know what our inventory budgets will be, our production budgets will be, so that we have an idea of what we will produce. This is numeric, but it's still an estimate. It's not the nitty-gritty, the exact numbers that we'll be using, but it's a broader sense. It uses a collective opinion, time series, regression, economic index correlations, and again, judgment. We'll be talking about these in a few moments. Lastly is short term. Generally less than 1 season, 1 day to a year is what we're looking at. This is short run control. It's the adjustment of production and employee levels. How many people do we need to work? How many people do we need there to do that day? Purchasing. What raw materials do I have to have? When do I need them? What day? What time? To make sure that we have what's there. Job scheduling for people to come in, the employees, and also scheduling for work to be done. Who is going to work when? Who's going to work where? Who's going to do what? Project assignment. Who's working on which project? What project will be done in what order? And overtime decisions. Do we need to get things done faster, so we need people in? Have we had an increase demand that all of a sudden that we weren't expecting in the long term or intermediate term, that we need to get things done, so we want to put in some overtime? Item level for planning of activity level and adjusting for purchases and inventory. This is the nitty gritty. This is the per item. This is what we need, what we have to have. And we're using trend extrapolation, graphical means, explosion of short-term product or product family forecasting. We're looking using judgment, and we're also using exponential smoothing. So what are our key inputs? The key inputs of all forecasting starts with information. Information is very important. You've heard garbage in, garbage out. That's what this is. If you have good information coming in, you're going to have good forecasting. The better information you have, the better your forecast will be. An analysis of this information. Numbers mean nothing if you don't know what those numbers mean. You have to be able to analyze them, explain them. You have to get into them and say, okay, this is what happens. Experience and informed judgment. I'm going to work with these two together because experience is very important. I'm going to tell you a story about when I used to work at Tom McCann, which was a shoe store up in Johnson City, New York. My boss got weekly forecast and daily forecast. What we were supposed to do each day of the week, how many shoes we were supposed to sell, certain types of shoes we were supposed to sell, and overall how much we were supposed to make that day through our sales. So we're looking at this, and he would get a phone call in the summer from a camp that was just across the line in Pennsylvania saying, we're bringing in X number of kids. We'll have the counselors with them. Each kid will need a pair of sneakers, a pair of dress shoes, two pairs of socks, and an extra set of shoelaces. So he knew how to staff for those days. Now, it wasn't always the exact same day. The way Tom McCann did their forecasting was January 1st to January 1st. The week was the first week of the year, the second week of the year, Sunday through Saturday. But the daily was the date. So the dates changed. The weeks were pretty much the same. So he would have a budget based on these forecasts for people to come in and work, for his employees. And he would have to change that based on when these camps would come in. Because if the last year on that day, there was, a huge storm, nobody came out to the mall, or, the bright sunny days usually in the summer when nobody comes out to the mall. And so nobody was coming in, so we'd have a very low budget. We'd have next to no money for employees that day. And it would usually be, him, maybe one or two other workers, part-time workers, and that was it. Somebody come in taking over for a lunch break for him, working a couple hours, and then somebody come in and working the nights with him so he could have a dinner break also. It was this type of idea. He would keep a calendar so that he knew what happened the last year and why this was different. Literally what they did was take, here's the amount of money you made last year, here's the amount that you have to make this year, and it was usually approximately 10% greater. Well, he looked at his calendar and said, well, geez, it's January, we had a huge snowstorm, therefore there's no budget. The mall was closed. We sold, one pair of shoes before they closed the mall, and that was it. So, we're supposed to make $150 today. Well, we're supposed to also have this huge sale. The weather's supposed to be great outside. So there's going to be those type of things. So he used his experience and his informed judgment to tweak the forecasts that were put in there because he knew that what the overall company thought should be what we made that day wasn't always going to be. It wasn't always true. So he used informed judgment and his experience to tweak what we had so that we were make sure we were staffed for when we needed it. Let's take a look at some forecasting models. And we're going to start with our qualitative or subjective approaches. And the first is a field sales force. This type of forecasting is where each sales representative is going to estimate their sales. How many of this widget do you expect to sell? It's going to be reviewed by a hierarchy, somewhere up there in management, and tweaked a little bit, saying, oh, you only say you can sell 50 this year, I think you can sell 55. Something like that. Easily divided by territories. These are the pros for it. Easily divided by territory, easily divided by branch, product, sales rep. It increases your sales rep's motivation because they're helping to actually figure out their own numbers on their forecast. Problems with it, the cons to it, very easy to underestimate or overestimate. And this becomes a problem when it's something that is rare, something that you don't have a lot of, something that if it could be used elsewhere, or you're saving it from one area because this sales rep says he's going to do 50, when in actuality he's only going to do 40. So where do those 10 extra widgets go? You're saving them for this person because you think he can sell them when they can actually be sold elsewhere. So we're taking a look at those type of issues. Also, they can underestimate. What happens if they get a bonus for every extra widget they sell over what was forecasted? Here's what you're supposed to sell. For every extra widget, you get X amount of money. Well, they're going to underestimate so that they get a bigger bonus. So we need to take a look at those issues with a field sales force forecasting model. Also, recent market responses are not taken into consideration. This is usually done sometime in advance, and very recent changes aren't taken into consideration, so we're not having the true number where we need it. Jury of executives. This is an averaging of independent estimates or a discussion by executives that results in a single estimate. So you've got your higher ups, your management, high management, sitting down saying, I think this area can sell this much. Overall, we're going to sell this many widgets. Short time to get an average. We've got a variety of viewpoints in there of people who know what they're doing. They're up in management for a reason, higher up, usually. But some of the cons, what's the time versus money? How much do you pay an executive? Do you want him to do a simple forecast? This is something that someone who gets paid a lot less can do easily. Sometimes it's hard to break down into territories because you're looking at an overall number. And often it's subject to a bias. Many times your higher management has pet projects. They have one product that is their product. They're going to push it. They're going to do that. And so they're biased on their number and their projections on how many will sell. So we have to be careful of that. Next is user expectations, and you've probably been involved in this before. This is a poll of customers or potential customers by questionnaires, by interviews, by those survey techniques. So you learn the thinking behind the customer's intentions. Remember, we want the customer's needs, the customer's wants. We have the pros and the cons from the customer's point of view. We're looking at what the customer wants or needs. This is great, but when does this usually happen? When you're sitting down for dinner? When you're in a hurry walking through the mall? Somebody stops you, oh, can I just talk to you for just a minute? And people get annoyed. So a lot of times the information we have is not good information because people are just saying anything to get you off the phone or to get away from you. The Delphi Method. The Delphi Method is actually a qualitative method, but it has quantitative parts to it. This is a consensus of a panel of experts, and it's normally what's considered a blind panel. It's normally people who do not know who else is on this panel. You have a lead person who is going to contact everyone and say, what do you think? Should our forecast be? Using your experience, your informed judgment, what do you think? That person will then go and get the average. They'll combine all the numbers and they'll send it back to people and say, off this panel, here is what the average was. What are your comments about this? And they go back and forth with this blind panel. The other people don't know who else is responding until they come to a consensus that everyone agrees that, this is a good number. This is what we should shoot for. This is our forecast. It is a qualitative method of forecasting using quantitative methods. So it's combining qualitative and quantitative together. But overall, because we are using informed judgment, we are using experience, it is considered a qualitative form of forecasting. So let's move along into quantitative forms. When we take a look at quantitative forecasting methods, we're taking a look at mathematical models or expressions. And we're going to show relationships between demand and some type of other variable. Two types, time series models and causal models. Both are using time in this, some relationship from the past that will continue in the future. Time series uses time as an independent variable to project the demand pattern to estimate demand in the future. Where causal models, the variables are used to show a consistent relationship with demand in the past. Again, both use time. They use elements of the past and how it will relate to things in the future. So components of our time series models, we start with a trend. And if you look at the top picture on this slide, you're going to see a graph that is just random numbers. It's our actual sales that we did. The trend, we'll notice that we can take a look that it's either a general upward or a general downward component to it. And we can find this out by a variety of ways that we will talk about later. The next is a seasonal component. That is actually the third picture here. And you'll notice that depending on the seasons, there are ups and downs. It's a fluctuation, rising and lowering, increasing, decreasing based on the season. The cyclical component, that fourth picture there, is a recurrent upward or downward movement that has a frequency of about a year. So it's going to, rise up and go down based on about a year. And last is a random. It's that short series of erratic movements that really have no pattern. So we can't find that trend that's happening. We don't know if it's a seasonal trend, a cyclical trend, a general upward, general downward. It's just all over the place, our sales. So let's start talking about accuracy. How do we find out how accurate our forecast is? We want to know, do we have a good forecast? Is it accurate? We can start by using mean absolute deviation, also known as MAD. It's the mean of errors taken over time without the basis of over or underestimating the forecast. So if we look at the formula for this, we're taking a look at the sum of the actual demand within a certain time period, that's a sub T, minus the forecasted demand in that same time period, taking the absolute value, we'll sum them all up, and then we're dividing by n, which is the number of periods used. This is very similar to standard deviation. In a normal distribution of MAD, it will be about 8.8 times that of a standard deviation. So approximately 50% of errors will be less than 1 times the MAD, 89% of errors 2 times the MAD, and 98% of errors 3 times the MAD. And if you take a look at standard deviation, 3 standard deviations are usually 99.7%. So we're looking that it's close but not exact. So let's take a look at some calculations. We're looking here at our actual demand, our forecasted demand. We're going to look at our deviation, A for that time period minus F, and the absolute deviation. What is an absolute deviation? It's taking away direction. If you remember right, on a number line, you go one direction for plus, the other direction for minus. So if you're looking at that, this is taking away the directional bias of that over or under forecasting. So to calculate our MAD, remember our formula for MAD was equal to the sum of the absolute of A minus F, both within that same time period, remember, divided by N. So let's start here. We have A, we have F, and our time periods are 1 through 6. We have 6 time periods here. So if we take a look at this, we have 120 minus 125. That is a negative 5. 130 for time period 2 minus 125 is a positive 5. Time period 3 is 110 minus 125 is a negative 15. Time period 4 is 140 minus 125 is a positive 15. Time period 5 is 110 minus 125. I have another negative 15. And time period 6 is 130 minus 125. That's a positive 5. Again, absolute value is removing, taking out each and every direction, the positive or the negative. So the absolute deviation of negative 5 is simply 5. The absolute deviation of positive 5, again, is simply 5. We're taking out the directional movement on that number line. The absolute deviation of negative 15 is 15 of positive 15 is 15 of negative 15 is simply 15, and of positive 5 is 5. To sum all of these up, I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 35, 45, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60. So my sum is equal to 60. So plug and play. I have my sum of my absolute values is 60. My N, the number of time periods, is 6. 60 divided by 6 is 10. What does that number mean? Well, in and of itself, absolutely nothing. It's a comparative number. We want to compare this number to another forecast method. What's the MAD on that other forecast method? Or into an industry or a company number. We want to find a forecast method that has a MAD of less than such and such to be considered a good forecast method. Because the lower the MAD, the better your forecasting method is doing. The lower the MAD means the less there are of deviations from between the actual and the forecasted. So the less deviation there is from the actual to the forecasted, the better you're doing. It means you've got you're forecasting closer to the actual number. And that's what you want. So a small MAD is good. The smaller, the better. Next is mean square error, MSE. And this is penalizing large weights. We're taking here the sum of each and every actual forecast within a time period minus the actual demand within a time period minus the forecasted demand within that same time period and squaring it. So we're going to blow up those big numbers and divide it again by the n, the number of time periods. Again, we want a small number. The lower the MSE, the mean square error, that means the less deviation and the less errors there are in your forecasting. The closer your actual demand is to your forecasted demand, the better. So if we take a look here, again, we have time periods 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We want to take a look here at an MSE, which is equal to the sum of the actual minus the forecasted squared divided by n. Now we've already done the math on this for our deviation. We have all of our A minus F's already with the sign there, positive and negative. What I call my dummy checks. When you square something, when you square two positives, you always get a positive number. When you square two negatives, you always get a positive number. So when I take a look at my squared errors, I should never have a negative number. I am not a good math person. I need to do all these, what I call my dummy checks, to make sure I'm not being a dummy about the math, and I need to check that. So I look at the end before I sum everything up to make sure I haven't put a negative in there by mistake. So if you're like me and you need to look at that, that's fine. If you're rolling your eyes right now, that's okay. Also, not everyone has to do math. Comes easily for some people, and for some people it doesn't. So I found ways to check my math. So we're taking a look here at squaring our A minus F for each time period. Our deviation A minus F was a -5 for our first time period, -5 squared, or -5 times -5. Last time I checked was 25. +5 times +5 is also 25. -15 times -15. How are you at all of those multiplication tables? I've got 225. +15 times +15. 225, -15 times -15, 225, and +5 squared, again, 25. Here again, I want to find the sum. So 25, 25, 25, and 25 is 100. Two more 25s is 150, plus 200 is 350, 450, 550, 650, 750. I'm getting 750 here. What did you get? Check my math. I'm going to do my plug and play. I take a look at what I have here that I have figured out my sum of A minus F squared, finding the sum, plugging it in, 750, plugging in my n. My n was number of time periods, 6. So I'm going to divide 750 by 6. I get 125. Again, in and of itself, this number means nothing. What this is a comparative number. The lower the better. And we'll compare this to another MSE from another forecasting method, or we'll compare it to our company MSE or an industry MSE to make sure that the forecasting method is well. 125 is the answer here. Moving right along to mean forecast error, also known as a mean error, ME. I learned it as MFE, so you'll find that I usually use that terminology. I believe that the textbook is using ME for mean error. The same thing. We're looking here at the RSFE. Lots of alphabet soup in this, folks. What this is the running sum of forecast errors. All it is the sum of your A minus F's for each time period. The ideal MFE, mean forecast error, is 0. That means you have no deviation. We have no error. We're forecasting perfectly. So here are our actual demands. They're identical to our forecasted demands. That in reality is what we would love to do, but seldom happens. So we have to take a look what happens if it's a positive MFE. If it's a positive MFE, it means there's a tendency to under forecast. Remember, we have actual minus forecasted, A minus F. When we are taking a look at our actual minus forecasted, if the actual demand is greater than our forecasted demand, we'll have a positive MFE, which means our forecast was too low. We're under forecasting. A negative MFE means we are over forecasting. Our actual demand is lower than our forecasted demand. So we've demanded too high. Now, when I look at this and I first started looking at going, that seems backwards. That doesn't make sense. But actually, when you stop and think about it, it does. Because A minus F, actual minus forecasted demands. So positive is an under forecast, negative is an over forecast. So let's take a look at the work we've already done. We've already done the work for the time periods of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All we need to do is sum these up. -5 plus +5 is 0. Minus 15 is a -15. Plus 15, I'm back at 0 again. Minus 15, I'm back at a -15. Plus 5, I'm at a -10. Notice this can be positive or negative. This is the first accuracy method that we're looking at that can have a positive or negative. And matter of fact, it's the only one we're looking at that can have a negative number in it. Because of over forecasting or under forecasting. So looking at our formula here for MFE, and I do believe your book calls it mean error instead of mean forecast error, we're looking at the running sum of forecast errors divided by n, which is nothing more than the sum of each actual minus forecasted demand divided by our number of time periods, which we plug and play for this one. We have a -10 for our running sum of forecast error divided by 6, and I get a -1.66. What does this number mean? It's negative. Are we over forecasting or under forecasting? A negative number means we are over forecasting. So be very careful with that. We have an over forecast here. Our forecast numbers are too big. Next, we're going to take a look at the mean absolute percentage of error, also known as MAPE. And there is a problem with this formula because it should have a times 100 there to get it into a percentage. It's the percentage of errors found in the forecasting model. We've done comparisons so far. When we took a look at mean forecast error, we were taking a look at comparing it to 0. How far away from 0, positive or negative, which way on the directional line? When we took a look at MSE, we're comparing this number to another number. Same thing with MAD, MAD. We're comparing it. The lower the number, the better for both MSE and MAD. The closer to 0, the better with MFE. Here we're looking percentage. We can take a look at something and say, here is the percent of times we're having errors, the percent of errors found in this. This is the sum of the actual minus the forecasted divided by the actual demand, all in the same time period, and taking the absolute deviation, summing them all up, dividing by n. So let's take a look at this. Again, this formula for MAPE is 100 times the sum of the absolute value of the actual minus the forecasted divided by the actual, all divided by n. When I take a look at this, I already have my absolute deviation. I've done my absolute deviation. So I have my time periods again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Plug and play, I know that's going to be a 6. So I want to take A minus F and divide it by A. So 5 divided by 120. I'm then going to multiply by 100. And this is going to be 4.17. For time period 2, it's going to be 5 divided by 130 times 100. This is going to be 3.85. 15 divided by 110 times 100. 13.64. 15 divided by 140 times 100. 10.71. We've already done 15 divided by 100 times 100, 13.64. And time period 6 is 5 divided by 130, which times 100 is 3.85. Again, I want to find the sum of these. So 4.17 plus 3.85 plus 13.64 plus 10.71 plus 13.64 plus 3.85, I did use a calculator, is 49.86. So plugging and playing, my 100 times the sum of is here, 49.86. Dividing it by n, the number of observations, the number of time periods we're looking at here, is going to be 8.31%. Don't forget that percentage sign. Remember, MAPE is a mean absolute percentage of errors. So we need to have that percent sign. Again, with MAPE, you want the lower number. The lower the percentage of errors, the better. That means the less errors you're making. So let's go in and start actually doing some forecasting problems. We now know how to evaluate our problems. Let's look at how we can do some forecasting. The first is a simple moving average. A simple moving average is a method of computing the mean of only a specified number of the most recent data values in a series. We want to take a look at a small piece of numbers to average them out, so we can figure out what the next month should be based on those months. So literally what we're going to do is take different time periods, the actual demand in time period 1, time period plus time period 2, plus time period 3, plus time period 4, plus, blah, 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 to time period whatever, and divide by however number of time periods we've taken. So if we look at a problem here, our time periods now, notice we're no longer dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're dealing with 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. We're looking at months, which is fine. We want to do a 3-month moving average. This tells us how many months, how many A's we're going to be using. So we're going to start off with 3. Which is using months 20, 21, and 22. So we're going to take 120 plus 130 plus 110. And we're going to divide that by how many did we use? 3. And that's going to give us 120. Now, if we're doing this in advance and we're looking at the next month, this 120 could be our forecast for time period 23. It could also be our looking at 12 months out of the year and take a look at the next year for that time period. So there's different ways that we can use this, and you have to decide how you're going to be using it. To continue with this, all we do is shift down 1. So I'm now going to take 21, 22, and 23. And I'm going to figure out the next moving average. So that's going to be 130 plus 110 plus 140, again dividing by 3. And I'm going to get 126.67 if I round off. Again, I can use this for an average or our moving average and forecast for time period 24. It could be on a next year. It's however we're using it. I'm now going to just slide down 1 and start with 22, 23, and 24. This is going to be 110 plus 140 plus 110 divided by 3 months. And if I do the math, I'm going to get 120. Again, this could be for time period month 25. It could be for next year. We need to take a look at how we're using this. Doing the last one that we're able to do, because we always need to have at least 3 time periods. We'll take a look using time period 23, 24, and 25. This is going to be 140 plus 110 plus 130 divided by 3 is again going to give us 126.67. This might be our forecast for time period 26 using this. This is a smooth average, calculating the smooth moving average. Similar to that is a weighted moving average. And we're going to take a look at putting a weight on it. We're going to take a percentage of each number, each actual demand in those time periods, and saying we want this month. And I'll come back here to single exponential smoothing in just a minute. But let's take a look at calculating a weighted moving average. Looking at a weighted moving average, we are going to be looking at, and I did not put it on this slide, I apologize. We want to look at this weighted moving average using weights of 0.5, 0.3, and 0.2. What do you notice about those 3 weights? When you use a weighted moving average, those 3 weights, or however many number of weights you have to add up to 1.0. So we're looking at using 50%, 30%, and 20% of the actual demand to figure out our forecasted demand of a next time period. Looking at those, they always, and I don't care if you have 3, 5, 10, 12, however many you have, they have to add up to 1.0 or 100%. What we do here is we take a percentage. The largest weight is going to go on the most recent data. So if I have 3 weights, I'm going to take a look at 3 months. The most recent data would be month number 22. So I'm going to multiply that times 0.5. The next largest weight is going to go down to the most recent data past that. That's going to be month 21. So that's going to be multiplied by 0.3. The lowest weight is going to go on the data that's farthest out. So month 20 will have the 0.2. If I multiply 120 times 0.2, that's going to be 24. 0.3 times 130 is 39. 0.5 times 110 is 55. What I'm now going to do to find my forecast for that next time period, for next year, however we're using this, I'm going to just add up these 3 numbers. So I'm going to have 24 plus 39 plus 55. And that's going to give me 118. Now, I'm going to erase my scribbles here, because what we're going to do now is move down 1 month. We're looking here at taking our 0.5 times the most recent data. That is now month 23. So month 22 would have our next biggest number, which is 0.3, and our 0.2 will go on the farthest out data. So 130 times 0.2 is 26. 110 times 0.3 is 33. And 0.5 of 140 is 70. So I'm going to add up 26 plus 33 plus 70, and I'm going to get 129. Again, because I'm still using these numbers, I'm going to erase my scribbles here. And I'm going to take and move down 1 and do 22, 23, and 24. So my most recent data is month 24. That's going to be multiplied by 0.5. 0.3 times month 23, or my 140, and 0.2 times month 22. If I do the math, I'm going to get 22, 42, and 55. So 22 plus 42 plus 55 is going to be 119. Again, I'm going to get rid of my math here so I can use this area again to take a look at month 23, 24, and 25. Looking at this, my most recent data is month 25. It's going to get my heaviest weight. Month 24 is going to get the next biggest weight, which is 0.3, and the lowest weight will go on month 23. So looking at my math here, I have 28, 33, and I believe that is 65. So 28 8 plus 33 plus 65 is 126. These become my forecast numbers for either the next month after or for next year, however we are working this. And that is how you do a weighted moving average. Moving on to single exponential smoothing. Let's go up here and take a look at the formula. Single exponential smoothing keeps a running average of demand, and it's going to adjust it just a little bit for each period in proportion to the difference between the last and the actual demand. So we're taking a look at here, this formula, and my formula is going to look a little bit different just because I use my T's differently. This is the last period plus an alpha, and that right there is our smoothing or our weighting constant. That alpha is considered the smoothing, and it's going to take a look at the last period's actual minus the forecast of the last period. And again, notice that your forecast and your actual demand, your forecasted demand, are all within the same time periods. So if we take a look at a problem here, this is where I want to take a look at the problem. We're going to take a look for demand for a snowboard. And during the past 5 months, the actual demand is shown. So here are our actual numbers. Taking a look for November, the actual demand was 196 snowboards, in December 268, January 315, February 299, and 101 in March. We want to compute the forecast demand for each month from November through month using single exponential smoothing with an alpha of 0.02, very small alpha here. Assume that the forecast for November was 212. So we're going to come over here. Remember, these are our actual forecast, or our actual demands. Our forecast, starting out with 212 for November. What we want to do is take a look at our smooth forecast, or our forecast, we can call it a smooth forecast here, for our next time period. So here I'm going to call it T plus 1. On the formula written on the before it, it was just called T, but you'll see why I'm doing it this way in just a minute. We want it to equal to our smooth forecast of a time period plus the alpha times the actual within the time period minus the smooth forecast within the same time period. Now, I want to put this down in English. We are looking for our smooth forecast for December using our smooth forecast for November plus an alpha, using the actual forecast for November minus the smooth forecast for November. This is where I get to plug and play. So our smooth forecast for December will be equal to our smooth forecast for November, 212, plus our alpha, 0.02, that was on the sheet before it, the slide before it, times the actual for November, 196, minus the smooth forecast, whoops, wanted to write the number there, smooth forecast for November, 212. Okay, I really like how this formula is written because plugging and playing is very easy. What you're going to do is start with 196 minus 212, multiply it by 0.02, and add 212. When you get that, you should get 211.68. If I continue on, my smooth forecast for January is going to equal my smooth forecast for December, that time period before it, which was 211.68 plus my alpha times the actual for December, which was 268, minus the smoothed forecast for December, 211.68. Again, working backwards, 268 minus 211.68 times 0.02 plus 211.68, I get 212.81. And as these are snowbirds, you could probably round it up to a whole. This isn't something you can chop into pieces. We can move on to our smooth forecast for February. It is equal to our smooth forecast from January plus our alpha multiplied by our actual forecast for January. That was 315 minus the smooth forecast for January. I keep looking up here to find that and I'm not finding it. So I'm going to write it right there real quick for my ease. Working this backwards, 315 minus 212.81 times 0.02 plus 212.81. Smooth forecast for February is going to be 214.85. I can work on my smooth forecast for March. 214.85 plus my alpha times actual forecast for February. Let me put this up here. My smooth forecast for February. Actual forecast for February was 299. 299 minus 214.81. And I'm going to have to ask you to do the math on that because I have not done it and I do not have a calculator on hand here to do it in my head. So, and we can actually go on, find this and find the smooth forecast for April. So this is exponential smoothing. How do you feel about these? We can now go back and take a look and complete a MAD, an MSE, an MFE, or a MAPE using this form. We can do it on the weighted moving average, simple moving average, either of those. So we can take a look to see how these forecast methods are doing comparatively to the other forecast method. This is concluding our forecasting. You have a homework assignment to do with this. It's actually, the math is very simple. It's repetitive. And once you figure out, I do the plug and play, I put the formula down first and just continue to plug in. And with this, I'll tell you the single exponential smoothing, I do write it out this way with the number so that I can see and keep going in each one. And believe it or not, this number now just plugs into the next formula. So I find that very easy to use. If you have any questions, please contact me. But I think you guys should understand this now. We're going to move on to location planning next, and we'll be back with you soon.